And then she went to University of Tel Aviv, where she got her BA and her master's degree. And then to Kenya, where she was a guide for safaris for a few years. And that's where I overlapped with her. And she briefly joined our mission to follow African wild dogs in the Masai Mara, where she essentially, after a few weeks or months, left because we weren't really energetic enough. I mean, we didn't wake up early enough in the morning, we didn't stay out late enough at night, and it was just too slow-paced for Merav. So she then went back, I think, to game driving, and then to University of Alaska, where she got her PhD, and she did her postdoc. And now she's chair of the Department of Zoology and Physiology at the University of Wyoming. And if you look over her career, it's quite remarkable. She works on a whole variety of systems, from the effect of invasive trout on otters, and to migration in Wyoming, to patterns of adaptation, physiology in polar bears and other species. So I think she'll introduce us to some of that today, and her talk is titled, When the Planet Warms Up, Will Social Relations Cool Down?
A fairy tale is very important. Well, thanks everybody for spending this lunch break with me. It's always a great pleasure to come to a new place and have very enthusiastic and informative discussions with people. You learn a lot from these interactions. Everybody's getting used to my accent by now? Okay, the word that is hardest for me to say in English with everybody understanding me is river otters, and that's the species I'm going to talk to you about today. Good Friday, March 24th, 1989. How many of you were alive? Oh, you guys are an older crowd. When I give this talk in other places, like half the room doesn't raise their hand because they were born after 1989. But on that day, the Exxon Valdez supertanker spilled hundreds and hundreds of tons of crude oil into Prince William Sound. The environmental damage was catastrophic, but it initiated a lot of studies on the injury and subsequent recovery of various species in Prince William Sound. And I was lucky enough to be involved in the studies on river otters. Everybody got that? Okay. River otters following the Exxon Valdez oil spill. I'm not going to tell you a single thing about the oil-related studies or findings that we have. Okay? If you want to know something about those studies and what we found there, please ask me later. But as we were following river otters in Prince William Sound, following the Exxon Valdez oil spill, we found that they have a very, very variable social organization, which was really surprising. We found some individuals to be solitary year-round, whereas others occurred in very, very large groups. Hello? Annabelle, you'll... You might. Okay, we'll do this. Okay. So obviously, as curious scientists, immediately the first question that came to mind was, so what factors determine... Oh, no, it went too fast. What factors determine sociality in river otters? And I'm going to show you this short video just to give you a feel of what social river otters look like. The camera is moving because one of them is messing with it. Okay, so what factors influence this large aggregation of river otters? By the way, there were 19 animals in that group. And to give you a feel for how large of a study area and how difficult this research was, here is Prince William Sound, and it's found in south central Alaska. Alaska is not an island. It is connected to Canada over here. And our study area basically encompassed most of the western part of Prince William Sound, about 4,200 square kilometers. Okay? So keep that in mind when I show you some of the results. Annabelle. What did we find? By implanting 55 river otters in that area with radio transmitters and then following them with a little plane, we found that these differences in sociality were sex-based. While most of the females were either solitary or occurred in very low or had low frequency of social interactions, the large groups are mostly males. And
Did you go USB? The USB came out.
Maybe. Okay, we'll try that. Okay, and if you look at the group composition, most of the females occurred in mixed sex groups, whereas the males were mostly found in male groups. So females would be found most likely with males, whereas males most often were in all male groups. Let's see if this works. No. Okay. Have a seat. Okay. So that's what we found in the 90s using radio telemetry. And more recently, I have recruited a PhD student into my lab. His name is Adi Barokas, and he's originally from Israel as well. And he came into my lab and he said, I know you've been telling this story for decades. I don't believe it. You track them from an airplane, once a week. How do you know what the fine scale things were? And you just want to slap that kind of student when they walk in. They've never seen an otter in their life. They've never been in Prince William Sound. They don't know anything. But you don't slap your students. It's illegal. So you take a deep breath and you say, good point. We'll use modern technology and test this. So what we did is we went to proximity tags. These are tags that, like your cell phone, interrogate each other. So when I call Bob, he knows it's me and he doesn't answer the phone. Okay, so this is tags that interrogate each other, and we know who came in close contact with whom. And they store the data on board. But you can put what we call base stations, and here is a base station we put on a river otter latrine site. And when an otter comes within several hundred meters of this base station, the base station sucks up, downloads all the data from the tag into the base station, and then you can come and get the data. So you never have to see the otters again to actually look at fine-scale interactions. And what did Adi find? And we just published a paper in 2016, that river otters have a very dynamic social system with what we call fusion dynamics, where they come together and they leave the groups. It's not one cohesive group that moves around all the time together, which is what we knew. And guess what? All these are males. All the females we tagged have never interacted with each other or with a male in the period we tracked them with this new technology. So I was right. But it was a nice study. So immediately when you see something like that, female solitaries, male highly social, dynamic social interactions, you say, okay, what's driving this? And immediately you think about kin selection, right? Do I need to tell people here what kin selection is? I hope not. You're EEB, right? Okay. If you don't know what kin selection is, read the literature. Okay, so we used microsatellites. We started this project before genomics was available, but we still use microsatellites because for individual ID, we found it's the best approach. And again, you can identify individuals by the genetic profile, and luckily for us, microsatellites in river otters are highly variable. We have one microsatellite that we use that has 15 different alleles, so we have very nice hypervariability. And we use that to identify individuals and look at the relatedness. So we compared coefficient of relatedness from their genetics to the telemetry locations in two variables. One is called dynamic interactions that looks at space and time, and one just simple frequency of association. And this is one example from one of our study areas. Anybody sees a pattern? Don't be shy. It's not your comprehensive exam. No, there is no pattern, no relationship between social interactions and relatedness. We took another approach and we said, okay, do otters that are highly social, do they have more relatives in the population? So non-social versus social. You see that most otters have very few relatives, close relatives. That makes sense. Very few, very high, close relatives. But there is no difference between social and non-social otters. Okay? So being social does not improve the number of relatives you have in a population. So we were forced to conclude that river otter groups are not kin-based, and there is no effect of inclusive fitness through kin selection. Okay, how about direct fitness? Maybe social otters have more offspring. So we looked at that, and using again genetics, we determined the number of offspring for each otter, males and females, and then looked at their sociality, and again, no pattern. So there is no direct fitness associated with sociality. This is just the cutest video ever. A mother otter scent marking. This is what we call the poop dance. And the little ones are trying really, really hard to imitate her and not succeeding very well. This is before they actually start swimming. They're really small, about 2.5 months old. Okay, so another hypothesis that we had to deal with. Maybe it is an anti-predator adaptation. And the predators of river otters are orcas. In fact, some stomach contents of orcas have shown river otter remains. Sea lions, we've seen attacks by sea lions on river otters. And bald eagles try and take those cute little pups that you've seen before. Okay? So I showed you how large our study area is. There's no way we can do direct observations, even though we did have some on attacks by sea lions. So how do you address this hypothesis? Well, we came with a few predictions. Because of the bald eagle attacks on young, females should be more social. Otters should be more social when these predators don't have other foods available, which is the winter months. And also, if safety is in numbers, larger groups should forage away from shore. So what did we find? Here is the annual, the year from January to December. These are females, these are males. I already showed you that females are less social than males, and you see that even though there's a little bump here, it's not significant. The males become more social during the summer months, so opposite of our prediction. Okay? And when we look at group size in relation to shore, we found negative correlation, which is, I think, a spurious result. It's not indicative of anything, it just happened to be a statistical correlation, a very weak one as well. So all these predation hypotheses need to be thrown out the window, and we had to conclude that sociality is not an anti-predator adaptation. Okay, so what yes? No, 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 what yes? Well, in Prince William Sound and elsewhere along the Pacific coast, river otters have two types of foods available to them. The first one is what we call intertidal subtidal fishes, such as this sculpin, Irish lord, rockfish, ronquil, gunnels, lots of intertidal fishes. They are usually either solitary or occur in pairs, and they have territories along the intertidal, and they're ubiquitous and available. But most of them have this interesting adaptation that they have spines and other structures that protect them from predation. Not surprising at all. And if you look at the energy returns from something like that, you will be eating a lot of mass, but regaining very little from it in terms of nutrition. The other type of food is schooling pelagic fishes. And these are herring, capeling, sandland, salmon that spend most of the year in the Pacific Ocean and then come to spawn in a nearshore environment. And they come in large numbers. So here are an example of 2 schools of herring. And here are the trees, okay, on the shoreline. So take a kind of mental picture and see how much biomass there is here in these schools of fish, okay? They don't have any structures, defense structures like the intertidal fish. Their defense is by schooling. That's why we call them schooling pelagic fishes. They come together in a big clump, and when they are attacked by a single predator, here is a picture of a salmon attacking sandlands, the fish in the school erratically swim away and confuse. They're shiny, right? And when they erratically swim in the water, they confuse the predator and escape. So what predators do usually is creating a net around the school, because when you throw a net in the water, these schools clump together, and then you can just pick your mouthful out of the condensed school, okay? So how do animals create a net around a school like that? Okay? If there are small animals, such as this puffin, they work together. Okay, many, and we see multiple species do that. Sea lions, seals, puffins, otters all work together to contain these schools, and then each gets the mouthful. Or if you're a humpback whale, come underneath. Have you guys seen those videos? They're amazing. They circle around releasing bubbles. The bubbles, the fish perceive the bubbles as if it was a net, and they aggregate, and then the whale comes up with a mouth open and just takes most of the school with it. All right? River otters apparently participate in these live nets. They create live nets around these schools, and they feed on these fish. And how do we know that? We know that because we use stable isotope analysis to determine what otters eat. And just to quickly show you, everybody knows the stable isotope analysis? Do I need to explain the details? Basically, it's a marker system, natural marker system, that allows us to track food webs. So here is an example of it: algae, crabs, crab eating seals, and orcas eating seals, and we can track the carbon and nitrogen signal of different food webs. So it's a natural, very nice system of natural markings. We use that system to look at what is the isotopic signal of stable isotopes in fish that are the prey of otters. And here are those pelagic fish, the herring, sandlands, salmon. Okay, they're down here. Remember, they're down on the nitrogen and in the middle of the carbon. Okay, and these are, turns out, are the intertidal fish. It's a different food chain, and so they are less depleted in carbon and higher on the nitrogen bivariate space. Okay, we collected hair from all these otters that we captured in Prince William Sound, and from each of them we took a sample of the underfur and the guard hair. The reason why is it gave us 2 time windows into their feeding ecology. River otters, unlike dogs and cats and bears that shed their underfur in the spring and then regrow it in the fall, because they're diving, and fur is the only mechanism they have to maintain air in their coats and keep warm. It's thermoregulation. They first shed and regrow all their underfur, and only then they shed and regrow all their guard hair. So it's a really cool system. For each individual here, there is a dot here, and males and females again. And what you see is that while most of them feed on intertidal diets, the intertidal fish, as soon as these forage fish come into the system, they switch, and mostly males switch to these pelagic schooling fishes. Looking at it in another way, just at the carbon, because carbon and nitrogen are highly correlated. So these are animals that exhibit low sociality. This is the underfur, and this is the guard hair. And you see that they don't change during these two time periods. These are the high sociality animals, and they eat more of the pelagic fish, and more so once they become very highly available in the system. So that's indirect evidence. Can we get more supporting evidence to the idea that it's foraging that drives sociality? We had 15 male river otters in captivity at the Alaska Sea Life Center for that Exxon Valdez related study that I'm not telling you about at all, but I'm telling you we brought in 15 males to do some oiling experiments. And before we started all the oiling experiments, we did some diving and foraging experiments on them. So we put a single otter in an area of the big enclosure. We had a big 90 meter square pool, saltwater pool, and we let them forage on fast fish, basically pink salmon, adult pink salmon, or slow fish, these intertidal fish that we actually got to go out and catch ourselves, which was fun. And we gave them 30 minutes to try and catch a fish. And we recorded the time it took them to catch a fish. And you see that it took a lot longer to chase and try to catch a salmon than it took to get an intertidal greenling or something like that. Mind you, we did put structure in the pool, so the fish were hiding. So these fish weren't just sitting ducks in the middle of the pool, right? That's not fair. It's not a correct experiment. We use PVC pipes and we build a fish habitat. We called it a fish habitat. And the fish, we let the fish sit in there and get acclimated before we let the otters go in and forage. And despite the fact that the fish could hide, the otters were way more successful, much faster in catching these slow fish. And then we did a similar experiment. This bar is the same as this one, but then we let 2 otters forage for the salmon, fast fish only, and then 3 otters, and you see that dramatically the decline in capture success, the time to first capture, once you let 2 or 3 otters start catching fish. This increase, slight increase here of 4 otters and more and 5 salmon is because the pool was 90 square meters. When you put 5 fish and 4 otters into 90 square meters, this is, everybody is jumping out of the pool in all directions. So there was a little bit of interference here instead of cooperation. Okay, so this is showing us that being social is really helpful if you're trying to get these fast fish. And when we actually plotted this, you've seen this figure before, now it's male and female on the same figure. With the data on fisheries, when the fish are arriving, you see that there is a huge correlation between when these pelagic fish come to Prince William Sound and when the male groups become larger. And finally, the final nail in the coffin is that when you look spatially and temporally about when the fish schools are in one spot, and when the otters are in nearby, within 18 hours, social otters are found closer to a school, any school. We looked at multiple otter locations and multiple fish schools. Up to 18 hours of time windows, social otters are much closer to fish schools than solitary ones. Okay, so we all have to conclude that sociality in river otters facilitates acquisition of schooling fishes that are actually the higher quality diet. So why aren't the females social? They have huge nutritional demands, especially when they have cubs or pups or kids, whatever you want to call otter babies. Why not the females? So after decades of studying this system, I still don't know. Damn. But we have an idea. And the idea is that females at that same time of year have little pups. You saw how cute they are. And they can't swim for several weeks. You know, they're tiny. She can't move with the school spawns here, and then the school picks up and they go 90 kilometers up shore. The males go with the schools. The females are stuck near the den where they have the pups. Okay? So we think that they just can't take advantage of the school all the time, especially because of the pups. But if the female fails to reproduce, or she lost her litter for some reason, she can join a male group, an existing male group, and forage with them and take advantage of this high quality food, right? And that's what we see. Females often join male groups. That's why they're most often in mixed sex groups, whereas the males just maintain their groups, forage cooperatively when they can. Everybody's convinced? Okay. Let's try this. Ha! It's working. Okay. Cool story. Really, really quaint. Who cares? I care. I'm sure Bob cares. Maybe Annabelle cares. But come on. Okay? The New York Times cared, but come on. So is it important? Well, yes, it is important, because it turns out that the abundance and availability of these forage fish that are determined by interactions between the atmosphere and the ocean, big black box that I don't know anything about, but the availability of these fish facilitates predation by fish predators, including bears. You know, bears eat salmon, etc. And the activities of these terrestrial and avian predators creates a flux of nutrients into the terrestrial system. We are always used to think about rivers as exporting terrestrial nutrients out to sea. Terrestrial nutrients to sea. Here we have an opposite way. We have animals transporting nutrients from the ocean to land. And that has huge implications for the microbial community, the plant community, and then to upper levels of the food chain. How many of you are ecosystem ecologists? Okay, so now I'm talking, what's your name?
Peggy.
Peggy, I'm talking to Peggy now. Peggy is sitting here and she thinks to herself, you're right. You're right, right? You're right. So we looked at that. On average, otters consume about a kilogram of fish a day. They have high metabolism, they're mustelids, they eat a lot. They eat about a kilogram, it's about 10% of the body mass. Adult otters that are not pregnant excrete 99% of the nitrogen that they acquire from their diet, so about 39.6 grams out of the 40 that contain in this. If you have one otter per 2.7 kilometers of shoreline, like we have in rivers and streams in Wyoming, each 100 kilometers will get 536 kilogram of nitrogen per year. Peggy goes, yeah. Nah, I put more on my garden than that. But latrines are not covering the whole landscape. If a latrine is found every 700 meters and is about 50 meters square in size, each meter square of landscape will get about 75 grams of nitrogen a year from otter fertilization. If you have one otter per 1.3 kilometers of shoreline, like we have in Alaska, then the number gets to 160 grams per meter square per year, and that's getting to be a little more, if you're an ecosystem ecologist, a little more convincing. and even more so when you consider what the plants around are experiencing, because atmospheric deposition is only 0.01 to 0.2 grams per meter square per year. Orders of magnitude more nitrogen delivered to otter latrine sites from marine sources. So, I told you that density, 1 otter per 2.7 kilometers or 1.3 kilometers, really makes a difference, right? Yes, but why are otters scent marking at latrine site? And I have to show you the poop dance again. Okay. All these videos, by the way, are from Adi's PhD, so not just the proximity tags, but camera work. Here is the otter dance, the poop dance again, you see. And then another one will do it. They love doing it in front of our cameras, which was great. Okay. So in the literature, if you look at why mustelids scent mark, you'll find these 4 hypotheses. Communication of reproductive status, so if the female is in heat, the male will be able to find her and copulate. Some people suggest that it's marking of territories. Okay. Others say in social, especially carnivores, social carnivores, it's between group communication. So basically taking the individual territoriality and transferring it to the group level. Or communication within the group. So we wanted to find out why river otters scent mark, and we did with the same 15 male otters that I told you. I'm not going to tell you what we did with the oiling. We did other experiments. One of them was investigating the responses to scent. And we offered an otter a choice between male scent and female scent. These are basically scats that we got from zoos all over North America that had river otters in captivity, and they collected the scats from the males and the females. We offered it without any other, they were put in the same type of jar, and the otters could go and smell and spend more time or less time as they wished. And we recorded the time they spent sniffing these otter sprains. We did not give them estrus female scats because we all know what happens to males when an estrus female comes around. No need to do that test, right? Do I need to elaborate? No. Okay, but if you offer them non-estrus female and male, turns out river otters spend more time investigating male scent. Okay? Remember, the males are the social animals, and they investigate male scent more. Using the same 15 otters and behavioral observations we did on them in captivity, we determined which animal in the group is dominant and which one is subordinate using network analysis. And this is a little complicated. This is outside the breeding season. This is during the breeding season. And it turns out that dominant river otters leave the group and move hundreds of kilometers away along the shoreline to find mates. And after the month and a half of breeding, they come back to the original home range and original group that was maintained by the subordinate animals. Now, these animals were in one enclosure. They didn't migrate hundreds of kilometers to look for mates, but they withdrew. They withdrew from the network. So this is the full network outside the breeding season. This is the network during the breeding season. You see a lot of individuals that were very highly connected here dropped out. These are the dominant animals. So when we looked at the behavior of these animals, dominant versus subordinate, dominant animals spend a lot more time investigating either their own group members' scent or the unfamiliar male scent than the subordinate individuals. So we conclude that this scent marking behavior has to do with intra-group communication of dominance. But we still have to account for the number of otters on the landscape, and the question is, okay, so how many river otters are there? So we use non-invasive genetic sampling. These are hair snails. This is John Depew who developed them, one of my graduate students. You put these hair snails on the otter trail, they run through, you grab a hair sample, you can also collect a fecal sample, and using these non-invasive genetic sampling methods, we developed, again, microsatellite analysis. We developed a capture history for each of these otters. Here are the profiles. You see these are all the same animal. Each color is a different animal. And then you take these, look at the dates, and create a capture history. Okay? With a capture history, you can use capture-recapture population models. Here we use Cormack-Jolly-Silver, which is an open population model. And you do AIC model selection, and you get the best model of them all. And when you look at the best model, what you find for otters in our system, that survival is pretty high, between 9 and 1, depending on a full data set or a subset. And then recapture probability changes with the different time periods, the different occasions, and this is your estimate of the population size. So 123 animals, 99 to 147, etc. It's really reassuring that when we look at the same population indices, using other methods, we get very, very similar results. So here is the survival estimates from the radiotelemetry study. You see that it's 1 and drop down a little bit to 0.9. Okay? So it still blows me away to think that I collect scats and poop and I can estimate survival. I mean, it's mind-blowing. And when we did a population reconstruction from live captures for this area, looking at this group, we estimated 65 individuals. This is what we get from the non-invasive genetic analysis. Very, very close. Okay? So, when you look at an abundance of otters, their sociality and their behavior on the landscape, what you get is a very interesting system of nutrient transports from sea to land. And these are all the otter latrines we've been monitoring over the years. And you see that deposition changes year to year. Here it is summarized for the different areas. You see it was really high in Herring Bay in 06, and then it dropped in 07. So we have hotspots of high nitrogen deposition on the landscape. Does it matter? It does. So here is the number of needles, or what we call leaf area index, per basal area, given how big the tree is, for pairs of on-latrine, off-latrine, on non-latrine, off-non-latrine. And you see that basically, if you look at the differences, otter fertilization nearly causes the same size. If you adjust for the tree size, the tree has 2.5 more needles on it than off-latrine site. And trees that grow on latrine sites produce more cones and more seeds. So here is a number of seeds in cones that we collected in seed traps on a transect from the waterline to inland. And you can see that there is a decline as you go inland. The elevation here is because of wind blowing, and a lot of the seeds from here actually end up here. And we know that these are trees that are fertilized by river otters is because they have very high nitrogen Delen 15 values compared to the same seeds we collect at non-latrine sites. So river otter fertilization increases needles, increases seed production, which affects germination all over the landscape, but it reduces plant diversity in the understory, largely because the trees are doing so well. So if you look at leaf area index versus understory diversity, you see a declining trend. The bigger the trees with more needles, more shading and less plant diversity in the understory. And then when you account for that factor and you look at the residuals, you see that the otter scraping and rolling, like you saw in the video, actually further reduces plant diversity. Okay? So what will happen when the planet warms up? This is an example from 1 year, a few months in 2014. You guys may know this. We have very high increases in sea surface temperatures in the North Pacific that bleeds over to Alaska. We call this the blob. Everybody heard of the blob? The blob. Causes a lot of mortality in seabirds and marine mammals. Okay, so we know we have global warming effects on sea surface temperatures. And colleagues of mine who studied fish in the Gulf of Alaska have documented a regime shift from cold water specialists. You see a lot of the cold water specialists declining, okay, with warming sea surface temperatures or increasing sea surface temperature, including capelin. We don't have capelin in Prince William Sound anymore. It used to be a very common fish, no more. Herring, greenling. At the same time, we have an increase in flatfish such as flounders, soles, and also cod. So we see a regime shift in the fisheries. The otters love eating these. Here's an otter eating a flounder. But these are the intertidal fish, not the high quality schooling pelagic fish. These are declining. To show you how important these pelagic fish, I already mentioned it before, here is herring. Here is what we catch the herring for. Humpback whales, seabirds. It's just an unbelievable resource we are losing it. Just to show you graphically what it looks like. And please note the Exxon Valdez was here. So we can't blame the Exxon Valdez for this. Continued, maybe an initial decline, but not a continued lack of recovery of herring in Prince William Sound. So, remember, it's not kin selection, it's not anti-predatory behavior, it's all about cooperative foraging after schooling pelagic fishes. And we did an individual-based model to model this, to see what will happen. And what you see is that proportion of time encountering schools in this model declines. So as the abundance of fish schools declines, so does the otter encounter of them, and that leads to a decline in sociality. Just to show you that this model is actually really on spot, we verified it. We calculated how many scats an otter in this individual-based model, how many scats we will find on our latrine sites per day. Okay, and these are the different abundances of these fish. This is the counts. This is what we actually counted in the 2 years we counted scats. So our model is right on in terms of modeling the otter behavior. And otters seem to be declining. This is the abundance of otters in Herring Bay immediately after the Exxon Valdez oil spill, when we had a huge mortality. This is in 97, when we have another estimate, and you see that they recovered nicely. In fact, we declared them recovered the following year. Silly us, because this is what actually they can be. When you have 2 data points, you think, hey, they're recovering. Oh no, they didn't recover all the way. And this is a Dee's dissertation, and you can see that it's declining. I mean, it's reached a peak and now declining. And Dee's shown that it is related to sea surface temperatures, this decline. So what's the fairy tale? What have I told you? I told you that sociality in river otters is dependent on the availability of schooling pelagic fishes. That latrine sites are a function of social or intra-group communication. That the social behavior creates a big flux of nutrients from sea to land. That this flux affects the terrestrial plant community. And now that we have a warming planet, because the availability of schooling fish diminishes, so will sociality in river otters. I'll leave you to think about the implications of this loss, while thanking my multiple colleagues who worked with me on this project and are working with me on this project, numerous graduate students who participated, very many undergraduates, and a lot of funding from a very diverse group of agencies. And if you have any questions, I'll be more than delighted to take them. Yes?
So, it's great. So I guess one hypothesis that I thought of while we were talking that you didn't address is maybe that sociality is a matter of the mating system or sexual selection. So could it be that the social otters, because it's all males mostly, they are lacking somehow, and you showed that they kind of do this, behavior where they mark something. So I know you showed that there wasn't any difference in reproductive success between the social and non-social, but I guess if there was a lacking behavior, I would expect a bigger variance in the groups.
Yeah, so excellent questions. We actually looked at that. We found no differences in any parameters between social and non-social otters in terms of body size, age, nothing. The key here is that the adult males, the dominant males in the group, and there is social dominance, they leave the group. They leave the group and go hundreds of kilometers away. They spread out from their home range and the original group and mate there, and then they come back, and the group is maintained by the subordinate animals, and they join back in and everything. I mean, it's an amazing system. The reason they do it is that males disperse about 15 to 30 kilometers away from their natal home. So they leave mom and they go to the nearest male group and they join it. The females, because they're solitary, they disperse long distances, 90 to 160 kilometers from their natal home range, because they have to find a territory that is vacant. So we have a sex bias dispersal, but with females dispersing longer than males. So the males actually maintain the group and they maintain the social interactions and they meet their mom occasionally, but when they need to breed, they go away. We had animals that went from Herring Bay to Untitled Inlet, which is close to 200 kilometers, and then at the end of the breeding season came back to the same group and the same spot. Now, within the group, we showed more recently, they don't hang out all the time. They go exploring in twos or ones, and a lot of, I think, some of the intra-group communication is, hey, I found a fish school. Why won't you guys come and help me feed on it? So I think that's part of the system. But yeah, we looked at all, I didn't show all of the data here, but we looked at all these parameters and we found nothing to distinguish between social and non-social animals, except for what I've showed you to here. Peggy, are you convinced?
Local reports.
What?
Yes, I am.
You're not. I'm gonna
Any other questions? I have one, Merav.
Yes.
So, river otters that are actually living in small rivers.
What?
The river otters which are actually living in small rivers. Like
No. The name river otter, not only is it difficult for me to mention, to say, it's not hard for me. It's hard for you to understand what I'm saying. But no, some of these animals have never seen fresh water in their lives, except what's collecting.
In Wyoming, for instance.
Oh, in Wyoming, when they live, yes.
Yeah. Do they exhibit this kind of sociality? Because we think there weren't big schools of fish for them to
Right.
gather.
So, in freshwater system, mostly river otters are solitary.
Okay, so they
Yeah.
have no sociality. So are they a model for global warming in a sense? Because they're not social.
Wait, yes, we are comparing them, of course. The cool place to actually look at them is Yellowstone Lake that you mentioned. We looked at the invasive lake trout on otters. In lakes where you have salmonids, such as cutthroat trout, the otters form smaller groups, and there are observations of them as a group chasing the trout onto the shore and catching them that way. So there are some places where there are a lot of fish, a lot of salmonids that are fast schooling fish. They would form small groups. But the largest group we had in Yellowstone Lake was like 5 otters, not anything bigger. But they were all males. So it's the same system. His brain is working on sociality genes, yes.
The only time Blair and I saw a group of otters foraging together was in Lamar Valley and the Lamar River, very small river. And there were 3 of them. We watched them for an hour and a half. And they were just going upstream, picking up fish, and they weren't interacting that
Right, yeah. Yeah, they don't have to. And, you know, you probably went to Trout Lake.
Yeah.
So that is actually...
We were in the river.
Oh, in Lamarville. Yeah. There is a female. She was killed by a car, which just broke my heart. There was a female who lived for a long, long time. People have reported her there for a decade, that had pups, and she would bring them up to Trout Lake, where we stocked cutthroat trout, Yellowstone cutthroat trout, to protect them. Took some from Yellowstone Lake and put them in smaller lakes around the park to have once we get rid of lake trout, that we can reintroduce if needed. And she just, she gets those fish without any help. So in river systems, they don't necessarily need, even when they deal with trout.
Anywhere where they interact with sea otters?
Yeah, they interact with sea otters a lot. Mostly, well, I've never seen them in any antagonistic interactions. They hang out on rocks a lot. On a sunny day, you can see sea otters, seals, otters, everybody lying, enjoying the sun. Yeah. The only place they might be competing for a little bit of food is in the Aleutians, where the sea otters may eat some fish, but other places they are totally separate. And the sea otters can dive way deeper. River otters can't dive more than 30 meters deep, so they're limited diving abilities. My pitch, can you turn off the lights? To those ecosystem ecologists who don't believe that behavioral ecologists can do really good work. So I do this when I do this when I give this talk to the public, like a public talk. It's actually part of the talk. So I want you to imagine that you were really lucky and you won a cruise from Anchorage, Alaska to Seattle. You got onto this Holland America cruise all the way through the Inside Passage. I mean, wouldn't that be cool? I'd hate it. I couldn't sit on the boat for that long. But some people like it. Anyway, imagine you want it. And in order to get from Seattle to Anchorage, you're going to fly. Okay, it's about 2,000 kilometers of distance in a plane. If you look down from the window, you're lucky because it's a sunny day, okay? You're flying from Seattle to Anchorage. It's a beautiful, gorgeous day, okay? And you look from the plane window down, and what you see is this coastline full of islands and bays and all this stuff. And more of those. And more of those. It's not a straight line of 2,000 kilometers. It's a very, very convoluted coastline with a lot of points of land. And just to give you a little bit of statistics, Before I do that, I'll tell you that I can tell you where otter latrines will be on this picture because we know what they select for. Basically, thinking about it, they advertise, right? It's a social communication. So if you had to advertise something, where would you put your billboard? In the most prominent places. So all the points of land that are sticking out is where an otter latrine would be. So all this landscape is full of otter latrines. In every point of land there is an otter latrine. Now, and I showed you that otters increase the carbon sequestration capacity. So each tree has more needles on it. It actually even grows more. You can ask me about that later. Turns out that forests absorb about 30% of all carbon dioxide emissions by humans. Us. Turns out that the coastal rainforests of North America represent 10% of the carbon sequestration capacity in North America. And as I said, the social communication of river otters increases carbon sequestration capacity nearly 2.5 times. So, how much would you pay for a live otter versus an otter pelt? I'll pay a lot more for a live otter running out in Prince William Sound just so I can drive my truck back home from the airport. That was my pitch.
Right.
Yeah.
With that, thank